So, welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for being with us on RFI. First, can you please introduce yourself in your own words?
I'll let Helen go first.
Okay, thank you for having us. My name is Helen Kahasodena. I work for Greenpeace Africa. I am the project lead for the plastics project. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great,
Over
thank
to
you. And
you, Sam.
thank you, Helen. I'm Sam Kwashi Aiden, and I'm the head of investigations at Greenpeace Africa. And yeah, Melissa, it's great to speak with you. Thank you for having us on your platform.
It's a pleasure. Well, great. We also have two sides of the continent at the same time. It's quite great. So first, you've released Greenpeace Africa has released a very impressive report on the issue of textile waste, of fast fashion, and the impact on the environment. Can you first tell us how you started investigating this problem and how it started that Ghana and neighboring countries were invaded with all these clothes from further away?
Yeah, Kazo, should I start?
Yeah, I think go ahead and then I'll
Yeah.
come.
Okay, great. Yeah, so Melissa, we first started looking into this last September. So this was a collaboration between Greenpeace Africa and Greenpeace Germany. And we were really curious to know kind of what was happening with fast fashion and how it was impacting Ghana as a country. Previous work, Greenpeace had done previous work in Kenya to kind of look at how dumps in Kenya have been, impacted and overburdened by secondhand clothing from the global north. So it was time for us to look at Ghana and see how that was also impacted. Because, fast fashion is at the root of an environmental and public health disaster. So we really wanted to know, okay, what is the situation like in Ghana? And just to give you a bit of context, and for the reason why a lot of African countries rely on these imports, is because a lot of countries, so for example, Ghana has the largest secondhand market in the world called Kantamanto Market. And so basically you have traders and market sellers who kind of rely on these imports so they can sell them on, basically. So it's become a big part of our culture, a lot of African countries to, rely on these secondhand clothes. But the issue that we're seeing is that the quality is so bad. And that's why we decided to do a report on this to kind of assess the quality, the types of clothes that are entering the country and why they're being dumped and disregarded across Ghana.
Yeah, sure. I remember when I lived in Nairobi myself, it was quite a popular thing to go to these secondhand markets, and a lot of people would just be excited about it. And we see in some part of your video reports that some people rely on this as a job as well, to kind of like sustain their family. So would you say that things have gotten worse because the quality of the clothes has been so much lowered? So now we can complain about notably the element of plastic in them, and of course, because there are more and more of them, there more of them go to waste, and then of course they get maybe burned or displaced in the wrong places. Is that one of the root cause of the problem?
Yeah, precisely. So I think the issue here is not just the clothes themselves or the textile clothes coming in, because I think as you have alluded, a lot of people also depend on that business. But as the years have gone, now it comes to a place where now there's more waste that comes in and being disregarded as this is clothes that can be reused. Some of it has, some of it is like the sizes are much bigger than what people can actually wear. If you look at a country like Kenya, you get other sizes that are much bigger. And then also there are issues to do with, they are not weather appropriate. You find winter jackets coming into a place like Ghana where the weather is, extremely warm. So that will, at the end of the day, end up as waste. And so according to the research, because Sam and a group of other colleagues went down to Ghana and visited Kantamanto and other areas, and most of what they found out, because they also spoke to traders who face these on a day-to-day, traders whose livelihood really depends on this, secondhand textile business. And so from our research, we are finding that, up to about, half of what comes in is usually not resellable. And some of these will definitely, end up on the dump sites. A small percentage of it, around 10%, will, be repurposed to other things like, usable bags, like hats. And there are a couple of initiatives in Ghana that are already doing that. But the rest will end up in the dumping sites. Our research also revealed that, there is an informal settlement called Old Fadama, where some of this textile is used to warm clothes in the public, to warm water in the public wash houses. And so the issue then on this is that we did some infrared testing on some of where these public wash houses are. And yeah, they add toxins. The results show that there are toxins that are carcinogens, and some of them, really up to 200 times the, normal allowable levels by, European levels. So it's really an ISO, and not just on the dump sites and on the beaches, but now we're also talking about the impacts on our health. Most of this textile is also made out of plastic. So what usually happens if it ends up on the dump site, that plastic will disintegrate into microplastics. Marine marine ecosystem will be impacted. For the few of us, or for the many of us who, love fish like I do, what that means is that we are consuming that microplastics as we enjoy, our dinner or fish in whatever form that we want to eat it. So it's a whole chain of not just environmental impacts, but also impacts on our own health as well.
So when I was
And
explaining your report to some of my colleagues, one of their first questions was also, where do they all come from? So I always imagine that the clothes end up in a quite legal secondary market in Africa from Europe. But we all know in Europe that most of our clothes are made in Asia, in China, but also Bangladesh and sometimes also Turkey. So is this a problem that's got worse for Africa because of the journey, the economic cycle of this close as well?
that is a really good question. And I think that, I think in this ever global world that we live in, there's so many ways in which, these clothes make their way into the country. But I think just looking at the data that we discussed in our report, in terms of the countries that are specifically responsible within the case of Ghana, so we found data from 2018 to 2022, which basically said that most of the clothes came from the UK, from Europe and North America. But then there were also countries like China and South Korea. So it just seems to be, Ghana just seems to be this easy dumping ground for some reason, for a lot of countries. And as Kaso mentioned before, the types of clothes that are being sent into Ghana are just completely unacceptable, and doing the research and being on the ground and being with sellers and being present at what we call the bale openings, which is when, the large bales of clothes come and market sellers pay to buy the bales with hopes of selling what is in there. As Kaso mentioned, nearly 60% of those clothes are completely unusable. So it's really showing that it almost feels like there's so many loopholes that in Ghana, within the Ghanaian system, that have allowed for these exports to take place. So I think there's still a lot more research to be done in terms of the exact countries and how it is that they come into the country.
Yeah, I'm sure. And we'll also get back to that when we're trying to talk about the solutions. Another point is that before I followed your recent research a month ago, I was very much aware of the fact that Ghana was already a dumping ground for other products like computers, cell phones. So maybe there's a route there, maybe from the UK, that made this sort of journey easier. Also, the geography, the port itself. So is it something that you think Ghanaians now are very worried about, being on the route of sort of waistline of the world?
Well, being from Ghana myself, sorry, Castle, once being from Ghana myself, I think that Ghanaians, well, it's a very interesting thing, a great conversation to be having because some Ghanaians know about this when it comes to e-waste, when it comes to fashion waste, but also a lot of Ghanaians didn't even know this was a thing. So I think that the average Ghanaian might not necessarily be aware, and I think I did a documentary on e-waste back in 2018, and the guises within which this e-waste enters the country is through different things such as like the global north will say, oh, we're trying to bridge the digital divide between the global north and the global south, and we're trying to give equipment to countries in need. All this nonsense essentially is what is kind of allowing this to still take place. So even with the fashion waste that we're seeing, I'm sure there's so many things such as clothes donations or charitable, like there's so many loopholes, and unfortunately I think the rules are not as strict or stringent as they should be, and that is why we're seeing ourselves in this current position. But yeah, with e-waste, with fashion waste, Ghana seems to be a dumping ground, and it's really heartbreaking to see how far we've come. And as Casso said, we were in Jamestown doing the research, and I always tell people who ask me, how was it? And I tell them, picture walking on a beach and not even walking on sand because there's so much textile waste and rubbish everywhere. So it's a very big problem.
Yes, that's what we see in some of your wonderful video reports. For instance, like, coastlines that used to be so beautiful, pure and, transparent, and now completely um, dumped with all this clothes. So let's go into the report. It's titled Fast Fashion Slow Poison. And the numbers you report there are quite enormous and describes mountains of unusable clothing dumped in informal areas. Can you describe for me first, like this visual aspect and the parts of Accra that are the most affected? And then we'll come to talk about, the wildlife, the beaches themselves, even probably the oceans, the rivers, you know.
I think I'll speak about it, but then pass it to Sam because he was on the ground. But from the images and from what the market traders were talking about, it is such a shame that that the beaches have been turned into something else. People cannot even go to the beach and enjoy the beach anymore. And the worst of that is that some of that trash is now like buried in the sand. Like there's a one video that the team on the ground had to like use a lot of force to pull it out. And so I was asking myself, how deep has this gone? And we're talking about uh, it happening now, but there's still more coming in, meaning there is still, if the trend continues as it is, you can imagine a few years to come, we'll be having heaps and heaps of that trash. So it is so bad. Just from the images, I wouldn't even want to stand on those beaches because it's heartbreaking to say the least. But Sam was on the ground, so yeah, Sam, I think Sam can explain it better than I can.
Thank you, Helen. And it's true, it was very shocking. And I think, you asked about the different areas that we focused on. So I think for Cantamanto markets, I want people to really picture a very vibrant market, hustle and bustle. People are hustling, people are trying to sell, people are trying to gather as many clothes as they can. So it's a very busy market with loads of little mini stalls within the market and very narrow streets, and people selling all sorts from clothes to food to, there's tailors, there's everything. So really picture that. And then when we move on to one of the landfill sites near Mortuary Road, that is where we really saw piles and mountains of clothes that have been there for years, and it's quite a sight, and it's very sad. And actually where the landfill site is, that we visited, is also a couple meters away from where e-waste is being burnt. So you're really seeing that this whole area of Old Fadama is kind of, drowning in clothes and a lot of toxicity. And then I guess moving on to Jamestown, where we have, piles and piles of clothes on beaches. You also see, I think one of the most shocking things for me was just to see how normal life seems for the average person from Jamestown, having to just, continue their lives living and working in this atmosphere. I think Ghanaians are very resilient as people, and, you make do with what you have, and it just speaks to, their commitment to their jobs, that they're still able to go fishing despite all, the hurdles that this textile waste is placing on their lives and their livelihoods. And actually speaking with fishermen, it was very interesting because they were telling us that, every time they throw nets into the sea to catch fish, a whole bunch of clothes end up tearing the nets up because it's so heavy. And also because the textile waste is so big, they're also having to use their canoes to go further deep into the ocean, which is also dangerous because our waters in Ghana are quite rough, so it's actually a high risk for them every time that they end up going fishing. And I know Kahaso mentioned fish. As Africans, we love fish. It's our main source of protein for a lot of us. And so once the fishermen come back with their catch, the fish sellers then have to clean the fish that's covered in plastic and textile waste, both outside and inside the fish. And so seeing those images as well with my bare eyes was very was very shocking, and just a reminder that this story is so important to tell, and we need more people to kind of prioritize this type of storytelling, and tell the stories of um of the people mostly impacted by this issue.
Absolutely, because when we see these images that you've produced, this great reporting, it's hard to not think of the fact that what's happening there is actually just the reverse, the shadow image of our culture of consumption here in the global north, and it's unseparable. It's if these clothes were not there in Ghana, they would probably be properly recycled if we're very optimistic in a place in Europe, but maybe also on our beaches. So let's hope that people understand how global a problem it is. And do you think, because your report also produces a recommendation that the clothes producers, the brands, the legal pathway in the global north, but also maybe in local and national governments in Africa that are affected, are able or even thinking of giving us a response and how to tackle this problem? Is there an improvement on the way we respond to this issue?
So I don't think there's any improvement, and that is what we are calling for as Greenpeace, because people are, they continue with business as usual, fast fashion, overconsumption, overproduction. Maybe just to take you back to the report, that our research also revealed that, an average, party top is used like on average 1.7 times. So that is not even two, like a party top is not even worn 2 times, and then it's, discarded, and then, you never know where that is going to end up. And so countries in Africa and other global south will have to deal with that. And so a lot of waste coming out of, our overconsumption, our overproduction. The one thing that global north needs to handle or needs to deal with is the overconsumption, because really we do not have to buy something new every time we go into a party. So we need regulations on that. But more than that, because we're looking at it, it's like two sides of the same coin. There is the fashion, the big fashion brands, which also need to stop preaching that, people need to keep on consuming, buying and more buying. But also there's the legal aspect or the policy side, where we also calling for the right policies. And for this instance, our recommendation, for instance, for the Ghanaian government is that they should ban the import of, waste. We're not really against the business, the second-hand textile business, but we do not want waste coming into our countries, impacting our communities, impacting the livelihood of people that really depend on this business. So the first call to action we have is that we need strict regulation in terms of just limiting the waste that is coming to the country. If the business has to thrive, we need clothes that can actually be resellable, clothes that can be reused, clothes that is culture appropriate for the different countries that these clothes will end up on. But also more than that, we also are calling for extended producer responsibility, where you see that the people who are polluting are actually responsible to clean up the act, to clean up the waste that they've actually contributed to. Sam, you want to add a few more?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think maybe it might be interesting to also discuss the types of brands that we saw, during the research, as they're also, a
Yes.
big part of the conversation, right? So, I don't know if we mentioned this already, but as part of the research process, we really wanted to do infrared testing. So while we were on the landfill sites, we collected clothes items, and we really wanted to. So we had this machine basically that allowed you to scan a piece of clothing, and the machine would tell you exactly what that item was made up of. So we scanned about 164 garments, and the results, found that 89% of the clothes that we scanned contained fossil fuel based synthetic fibers, so essentially plastic. And so out of the 164 garments, the top brands that we identified were H&M, Marks and Spencer's. We had Next, Zara, Primark, and New Look as the top. I believe that was the top eight. And there were a couple other brands, but that was the majority of the brands that we identified. And so I think, as we're talking about fast fashion, we're in a season or in a decade or a time where fast fashion has become ultra fast fashion, and so I think unfortunately there's no signs of it slowing down. And so when we look at the future, it's really a question of what kind of clothes do we want to be wearing, and how can we really push them to use healthier and more sustainable fabric or material to make those clothes. And we must also understand that the more these clothes are made of plastic, the less they will biodegrade, and the more they'll be toxic to our environment and our people. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be a broader conversation around the future of fashion, and yeah, and also the lifespan of the clothes is a big issue, because the quality will just keep getting worse, and the pollution as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you bring these details up on which brands, because I think lots of the consumers are quite young in Europe. They're not always aware. Also, I wanted to mention some of the consequences of this is that the clothes might be burned in open fire. That impacts, I'm pretty sure, the air quality and also safety of people, because that was not something that was probably doable a decade ago even. And I was wondering, we have COP29 coming up in November. It's always very difficult to get some of the voices heard, especially in the global south. But when we're talking about plastic and pollution, it has an enormous impact on climate change. All the conversation is focused on CO2 and obviously global warming, but plastic is an enormous issue. And I've myself have been trying to convince a lot of people around me that I find are quite aware to get rid of single-use plastics. So do you agree that actually this very cheap clothes, especially on the second-hand market, as Helen has said, are kind of almost single use? When you say it's 1.5 or maybe 2, it means that they're so cheap that even people that are thought as quite poor can not resist and buy them and wear them twice. So it is a conversation that is quite global on the issue of climate change, and maybe you can name before we finish some of the main recommendation of the reports to notably the Ghanaian government, but also other African governments, and maybe even the United Nations? Or is this something you have any hope about, like, global conversation next month on this issue?
Yeah, I think that's a good conversation to have as well. And now that we are approaching, COP29, and hopefully we could also, hope that some of these conversation will be had in this kind of meetings. But coming back to the issue of, what are some of the solutions or recommendations that we are proposing to our own government, apart from, ensuring that they have strict regulations to ensure that there's no that dead waste or waste doesn't come into their countries. I think the other a huge aspect or recommendation that we have for African governments, or where the dumping is actually taking place, is that they also need to look at their own local solutions or local fashions. Most of these local fashions are slow, they're circular for you know most of the clothing and the fashion sector. So our recommendation is that they should also invest in this kind of solution, because um, this will also in one way or the other highlight makers and makers of local fashion, but also people who are actually doing upcycling, because there are initiatives. And even in Accra, Ghana, there are quite a number of initiatives that the investigative team visited and really documented what these people are doing. And by so doing, they will be able to alleviate the waste fashion problem, or at least be able to reduce the waste fashion problem. But also more to do with the people who are dumping. I think we need to relook at how, we shouldn't just be looking at it as business as usual. We need to relook at other sustainable materials to make clothes, but also the issue of overproduction and overconsumption, because we don't really need all this much, because a whole lot of the time, and Sam has alluded to this is sent to global south as this is charity, this is we're going to help people who are living below poverty levels in Africa. In the case of e-waste, it's usually things like technological transfer. And when you dig deeper into that, this is not actually true. It's just that they're transferring their responsibility to, to people who do not even have the resources to deal with that waste. So we just want to send a strong message to them that Africa is not their dumping ground. We not a dumpster. So they need to deal with their own waste problem, because if they are overproducing, they also need to find a way of dealing with that waste without really transferring the problem to communities in Africa who do not have the right resources, the right, technology, the right, capacity to deal with this waste.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to both of you. If there's anything you'd like to add, I'm just
Um,
time.
yeah. I just wanted to just say, I mean, Helen hit the nail on the head with all of that when it comes to the demands for the Ghanaian government. As she said, we're not calling for a ban on all on all textiles, because our local economies rely on that. So we just really need the Ghanaian government to be firm with the types of clothes that we allow into the country. But I think, I think we released like a video on Instagram the day after, or the day the report came out, and it's done so well. It had over 2.5 million views, and it's so great to see the types of conversations that are being had in the comment section. And I think that a lot of people as consumers are really also questioning their own choices when it comes to buying clothes and giving into all these, Black Friday sales and all these, tantalizing deals that we're seeing a couple times a year. So I think we should also kind of speak to consumers and really ask people to be more ethical with the choices that they make when it comes to fashion. And, I think we all like trends. We all like to look hip and sharp. But, we have to think that all of these decisions are at a cost to our environment. So we need to be, think more sustainably when it comes to our ways of purchasing. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Absolutely, and I think that's true for every parts of the world. It's a two-way conversation. So thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you for, having this. Looking forward to the final product. And yeah, let's keep chatting. Hope we can do something like this again. Thanks,
Yes,
Melissa.
yes. Melissa, thank you so much for your time, for giving us your platform to share our report. So much work went into this. This was almost a year in the making, and it was so great working together with local teams in Ghana. I think it was great to work with, Ghanaians on this and to see that, they're also as passionate about their environment. So I just hope that we continue to raise awareness and hopefully this plants many seeds in people's minds and, you know,
Thanks very
great.
much.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Great to meet you.
Bye. All the best.
Bye.